The monitor beeped at 2 a.m., slow, indifferent, counting down what remained of Kang Ji-hoon's life. He didn't flinch. Men who had spent a decade as Seoul's most feared enforcer learned early that stillness was the only armor that never failed. The coldest blade in Myeongdong, reduced to a hospital gown and a failing heart. If his enemies could see him now. The syndicate had arranged everything: surgeon, private ward, an anonymous donor already in transit. Ji-hoon hadn't asked questions. Men like Chairman Song didn't frame requests as requests. A nurse adjusted his foreline without meeting his eyes. Smart woman. He closed his eyes for her. And the darkness behind his lids filled immediately with the one thing he never allowed himself in daylight. Laura. Dr. Laura Vance. Laura Vance, the name she took when she married him. A black American doctor who had chosen Seoul over comfort, and the only woman he had ever married. He had signed the divorce papers himself. Pushed her toward a life that didn't end in a body bag. 5 years of silence. 5 years of breathing around the shape of her absence. The anesthesiologist entered and spoke in low, clinical tones. The donor had arrived. Matching blood type. Exceptional cardiac health. A rare compatibility. Almost, the doctor said quietly, almost as if fate had a hand in this, as if this heart were made for you. Ji-hoon almost smiled at that. Down the corridor, 2 floors up, a pen scratched across an emergency consent form. A woman's hand signed one final time. Laura Vance. The anesthesia reached him like cold silk pulled over warm skin. Ji-hoon woke up like a man pulled from deep water, slow, heavy, confused about which way was up. The ceiling was white. Machines hummed around him. His mouth tasted like metal and sleep. He lay still for a long moment, the way he always did in unfamiliar places. Old habit. Dangerous men don't sit up fast in rooms they don't fully remember entering. Then he felt it. A warmth in his chest. Not pain, he knew pain like an old neighbor. This was something else. Something steady and quiet and strange. A beat that felt almost too alive, like a second voice inside a silent room. His own heart had always felt like a stone dropping in cold water. Heavy. Reluctant. This was different. This beat felt like it meant something. Ji-hoon raised one tattooed hand and pressed it flat against his chest. His eyes stayed on the ceiling. The machines kept counting. Outside the window, Seoul was beginning to go gray with early morning. He should have felt relief. The surgery was done. He had survived. The syndicate had gotten what they paid for. Instead, something he couldn't name sat quietly behind his ribs. Not pain. Not peace. Something that felt, impossibly, like longing. He closed his eyes and pressed harder against his chest. Whose heart is this? Ji-hoon asked once. Politely, by his standards. The nurse smiled the way people smile at dangerous things they are trying not to provoke. Donor information is confidential, Mr. Kang. It's hospital policy. He didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. By the second day, the head nurse had transferred to a different floor. By the third, the attending doctor was sending a colleague in his place. Ji-hoon watched this happen with the patience of a man who had learned that pressure, applied quietly and consistently, eventually opened every door. On the 4th morning, he sat up in bed and looked at the junior doctor who had drawn the short straw that shifted. The donor file, Ji-hoon said. I want to see it. The young man's clipboard trembled slightly. Sir, we legally cannot. I'm not asking about the law. Ji-hoon's voice was low and even. I'm asking about the file. The doctor left as if the room was on fire. Somewhere in this hospital, a folder existed with a name inside it. A name that, for reasons he didn't yet understand, felt urgent in a way that had nothing to do with gratitude. The physiotherapist made him walk on the 5th day. Short distances only. Down the corridor and back, his 4 stands rolling beside him like an obedient shadow. Ji-hoon hated it. Not the pain, the visibility. Being seen struggling was a luxury he had never allowed himself. He was turning back toward his room when he noticed the lost and found basket sitting on the nurse's station counter. A small, sad collection of forgotten things. A child's sock. A phone charger. A folded umbrella. And a scarf. Deep green. Soft cotton. The kind of simple, practical thing that cost very little and lasted years if you took care of it. Ji-hoon stopped walking. He stood there for 3 full seconds, which, for him, was a very long time to stand still without a reason. Then he reached out and lifted it. The scent hit him before his mind could prepare a defense. Something clean and warm. Shea butter and faint jasmine. A combination so specific, so completely singular, that his chest tightened around it like a fist. He knew that scent. He had known it for years. Ji-hoon set the scarf down carefully. Then picked it up again. His hands, which had never once trembled holding a blade, were not entirely steady. He couldn't sleep. Again. Ji-hoon sat in the dark of his private room, the green scarf folded across his knees, his hand resting on top of it like it might disappear if he let go. The corridor outside was quiet. The night shift moved slowly, soft shoes on polished floors. At 2:47 a.m., a young nurse pushed open his door to check his monitors. She was new. He could tell by the way she startled slightly at finding him awake and upright in the dark. She checked the machines quickly, typed something into her tablet, and turned to leave. Then her tablet buzzed. She glanced at it, frowned softly, and murmured to herself, the way tired people do when they forget they are not alone. "Rest well, Dr. Vance." She was through the door before the words fully landed. Ji-hoon didn't move. The machines kept beeping. Seoul kept sleeping. The scarf sat across his knees, green and soft and smelling of shea butter and jasmine. Dr. Vance. The chapel was empty at 3 a.m. small and plain, with 6 wooden pews and a single light above the front that was more yellow than warm. Ji-hoon stood in the doorway for a moment. He had not been inside a place like this since his mother's funeral, 20 years ago. He was not a man who prayed. He was not sure he believed in anything that couldn't be held or broken. He went in anyway. He sat in the back pew. The scarf was still in his hand. He didn't remember carrying it down the corridor. Laura. She had driven through Myeongdong on a rainy Tuesday night and ended up in this same hospital. She had signed a form. She had given her heart, her actual, living heart, to an anonymous recipient. To him. She hadn't known. She couldn't have known. Or maybe some part of her had. Ji-hoon bent forward slowly until his forehead touched the pew in front of him. His shoulders pulled inward. His whole body contracted around the thing growing in his chest, not warmth now, but something vast and breaking. No sound came out. The coldest blade in Myeongdong sat alone in a dim chapel and fell completely apart in total silence. The man who ended wars with a whisper. Laura's heartbeat counted every second of it. The hospital social worker brought it the next morning. A plain white envelope, slightly creased. She said it had been found with the donor's belongings, addressed simply, "For whoever receives this. Please make sure they get it." Ji-hoon held it for a long time before opening it. The handwriting was neat and unhurried. Laura had always written like she had all the time in the world. "Dear stranger. I don't know who you are. I don't know your age or your story or what kind of life you've been living. But I know this, you were worth saving. Someone who loves you believed that completely. Even if that someone was only me, and I never got to tell you. Take care of it. My heart has always been stubborn and loud and full. I hope it gives you some trouble. The good kind. Don't waste the time you've been given. Don't spend it being hard when you could be honest. Don't protect people by leaving them. I learned that too late. Live well, stranger. Live warm. L. Ji-hoon read it 3 times. On the third reading, His jaw was tight and his eyes were dry because he had nothing left to give in that direction. She hadn't known. And yet every single word had been written directly to him. The message came on the 8th day. No greeting. No signature. Just an address in Myeongdong and a time. Ji-hoon recognized the format. Chairman Song had never needed to introduce himself. His lieutenant, Park Dae-soo, arrived that afternoon with a fresh suit folded over one arm and the careful expression of a man delivering bad news to someone who shoots messengers. The chairman says you've rested enough. Ji-hoon looked at him from the hospital bed. Does he? There's work. Dae-soo set the suit down slowly. The Jong brothers have been moving into our territory while you were here. The chairman wants it handled cleanly. The old version of Ji-hoon would have already been reaching for the suit. Instead he looked down at his own hands. The tattoos. The history written in black ink across every knuckle. Laura's heart pushed steadily behind his ribs. Don't spend it being hard when you could be honest. Tell the chairman I need another week. Dae-soo blinked. In 10 years, he had never heard those words come out of Ji-hoon's mouth. He won't like that. No, Ji-hoon agreed quietly. He won't. He turned toward the window. Outside, Myeongdong glittered and hummed, completely indifferent to the fact that everything had changed. Mino came quietly, the way he always did, slipping into the hospital room just after midnight with a folder tucked under his arm and trouble sitting plainly on his face. Ji-hoon didn't ask how he got past the night staff. Mino had never needed help moving through places he wasn't supposed to be. I found the driver, Mino said, setting the folder on the bed. The one who hit her car. Ji-hoon opened it slowly. Photographs. A route map. A timestamp. And a name he recognized immediately, a low-level syndicate errand man with a history of making problems disappear on Chairman Song's behalf. The air in the room changed. The original target, Mino said carefully, was your vehicle. Same route. Same time. You changed your schedule that evening, remember? The dinner with the Japanese suppliers ran long. Ji-hoon remembered. Laura had been driving a dark sedan. Same model as his. Same road. She had died in a hit that was meant for him. She had then saved his life with the very heart that stopped beating because of his enemies. Ji-hoon closed the folder. Laura's heartbeat moved steadily inside his chest. Warm. Constant. Painfully alive. His hands on the folder were completely still. But his eyes had gone somewhere very cold. He discharged himself 3 days early. The doctor objected. Ji-hoon listened politely, signed the forms, and left. Mino drove him to Mapo District without being asked for the address. That alone told Ji-hoon how thoroughly Mino had already done his research. The clinic occupied the ground floor of an old building on a narrow street where the shops were small and the signs were handwritten. A simple name was painted above the door in both Korean and English. No grand signage. No polished exterior. Just a clean, honest space wedged between a rice cake vendor and a shoe repair shop. A handwritten notice on the door said, "Closed until further notice." We are sorry. Ji-hoon stood on the pavement outside and looked through the glass. Inside he could see the waiting area. Plastic chairs in bright colors. Children's drawings taped to the wall. A small shelf of books. Everything modest and deliberate and cared for, the way Laura cared for everything she touched. An elderly woman stopped beside him, a shopping bag on each arm. You knew the doctor? She asked, following his gaze. Yes. The woman was quiet for a moment. She never charged us full price. Not once in 4 years. She shook her head slowly. This street lost something real. Ji-hoon said nothing. He pressed his hand to his chest and stayed a little longer. Laura's colleague found him there. A small woman in her 40s, Dr. Shin, who had worked alongside Laura for 3 years and had clearly not slept properly since the accident. She studied Ji-hoon's face on the pavement outside the closed clinic with the careful look of someone who had heard his name before and formed an opinion about it. She handed him a folded document without a greeting. "I thought you should know," she said simply. It was a medical record summary. Laura's annual health evaluations going back 4 years. Every result clean. Every marker optimal. A note in the margin of the most recent report, written in Laura's own hand. "Maintain. Don't slip. Someone may still need this." They arrived on a Wednesday morning. 3 of them, young and loud, with the particular confidence of men who had never once been seriously refused. Ji-hoon was still standing outside the clinic with Dr. Shin when they pushed through the narrow street, the largest one knocking a display of vegetables sideways without looking back. Their leader stopped at the clinic door and pulled out a folded paper. A number was written on it. Large enough to be insulting. "Monthly fee," he said, holding it toward Dr. Shin. "For protection. You reopen without paying, the place has problems. Pipes. Windows. That kind of thing." Dr. Shin's face went tight. Ji-hoon stepped forward. Just 1 step. Unhurried. The young man's eyes moved to him, to the neck tattoos, to the hands, to the specific quality of stillness that certain men carried like a warning sign written in a language everyone instinctively understood. The confidence in his face didn't disappear all at once. It drained slowly, like water finding a crack. "You know the name Kang Ji-hoon," Ji-hoon said quietly. It wasn't a question. The paper dropped without meaning to. "Leave the street," Ji-hoon said. "Don't come back." They left quickly. The vegetable display stayed knocked over. Nobody laughed. Word moved through Mapo district the way word always moves through small, tight streets, quickly and with detail added at every corner. By Thursday, everyone within 6 blocks knew that Kang Ji-hoon was standing behind the clinic on the narrow street between the rice cake vendor and the shoe repair shop. No one came back for the protection money. But Ji-hoon didn't rely on reputation alone. He made 3 phone calls that afternoon. Short conversations, measured and quiet, to men who owed him favors accumulated over a decade of dangerous work. By evening, 2 of them were stationed at either end of the street. Not armed visibly. Just present. Just recognizable. Dr. Shin watched all of this from the clinic doorway with an expression caught somewhere between gratitude and deep discomfort. "You're keeping this place safe the same way it became unsafe," she said carefully. Ji-hoon considered that honestly. Yes. Laura wouldn't have loved that. No, he agreed. She wouldn't. He looked through the clinic glass at the children's drawings still taped to the wall inside. Bright colors on white paper. Small handprints. Crayon suns. But she's not here to find a better way yet. He pressed his hand briefly to his chest. I'm still learning hers. The apartment Mino had arranged was clean and quiet, 3 floors above a street that never fully slept. Ji-hoon stood in the bathroom at midnight, the light harsh and unflattering, and looked at himself properly for the first time since before the surgery. The man in the mirror was not someone Laura would have chosen to love. He knew that objectively. The tattoos climbed his neck like a record of every wrong turn, every choice made in darkness, every line crossed and never recovered. His face was harder than it had been 5 years ago. His eyes had the particular flatness that came from seeing too much and feeling too little for too long. He had built this man deliberately. Piece by piece. Year by year. He pressed his hand to his chest. It didn't match him. That was the most painful part. She had written live warm in her letter. Ji-hoon looked at the tattoos on his hands for a long time. Then he turned the bathroom light off and stood in the dark, listening to her heartbeat, letting it tell him who he still had the chance to become. Mino laid the evidence on the table without drama. A phone log. A bank transfer. A timestamp that placed one specific call 30 minutes before the night of Laura's accident. The call had come from inside Ji-hoon's own operation. Park Dae-soo. His lieutenant of 7 years. The same man who had brought the suit to the hospital. Who had delivered Chairman Song's message with careful, practiced eyes. Ji-hoon sat across from Dae-soo in the back room of a restaurant that had been closed for private use before Dae-soo arrived. He watched the man's face move through its calculations, denial, then bargaining, then the slow collapse of someone who realizes the math no longer works in their favor. The chairman offered my family protection, Dae-soo said finally. I have a daughter, Ji-hoon. I know you do. He said you were becoming a liability. That removing you was necessary. Ji-hoon was quiet for a moment. It was Dr. Shin who found it. A small voice recorder in the back of Laura's desk drawer when they finally opened the clinic to begin sorting through her belongings. A sticky note on the back read, "For Ji-hoon. If he ever comes back." Dr. Shin handed it to him without a word and left the room. Ji-hoon sat in Laura's desk chair, small and practical, like everything she owned, and pressed play. Piano. Simple and unhurried, the kind of melody that didn't try to impress anyone. He recognized it immediately. An old song she used to play in their apartment on Sunday mornings when she thought he was still asleep. He had never told her he would lie there and listen rather than interrupt it. Then her voice, soft between the notes. I don't know if you'll ever hear this. But I still play the things I learned when I was happy. I thought maybe the music deserved to go somewhere it was loved. Even if I can't. The recording ended. The clinic was very quiet. Ji-hoon sat with the recorder held carefully in both tattooed hands, Laura's heartbeat and Laura's melody occupying the same small space inside his chest. He stayed that way for a long time. Chairman Song chose a private dining room in Gangnam. Expensive and quiet, the kind of place where terrible things were discussed over good food. He looked well. Comfortable. The look of a man who had not yet accepted that the ground beneath him was shifting. You've been spending time in Mapo, Song said pleasantly, pouring tea for them both. A charity clinic. Very touching. Ji-hoon said nothing. Song set the teapot down carefully. I'm prepared to offer you everything, Ji-hoon. Full leadership. The entire operation. More than you ever would have had as my enforcer. He paused. Laura's legal team has been building a negligence case against the syndicate. Quietly, but effectively. I need that stopped. Permanently. The dining room was very still. Laura's legal team. The people she had trusted to protect her work, her clinic, her patients, even after she was gone. She had even planned for that. Ji-hoon looked at the tea he hadn't touched. She prepared for everything, he said quietly. Almost to himself. She was thorough, Song agreed. Which is exactly why they need to be handled. Ji-hoon raised his eyes slowly to the chairman's face. You killed her, Ji-hoon said. Simple and flat. You arranged the car. You used Dae-soo. And now you're sitting across from me asking me to finish what you started. Song's pleasant expression didn't waver. I'm offering you a throne. I know. Ji-hoon stood. That's what makes it so easy to refuse. Song called a gathering the old way. Every lieutenant, every senior man, every person who held rank inside the syndicate's structure. A warehouse in Yeongdeungpo, deliberately chosen for its size and its message. This was not a meeting, it was a courtroom. Ji-hoon arrived alone. The room was full and silent in the way that rooms full of dangerous people go silent when something significant is about to happen. Song stood at the front, unhurried, every inch the chairman. Kang Ji-hoon has refused a direct order, Song announced. I'm giving him the opportunity to correct that here. Publicly. Every eye moved to Ji-hoon. He stood in the center of the room and looked around slowly. Men he had worked beside for a decade. Men who feared him. Men who had followed him without question because the blade never bent. I'm done, Ji-hoon said. Quietly, but the room was quiet enough. Murmuring moved through the gathered men like wind through grass. Song's expression cooled. You don't get to be done. The blade is broken, Ji-hoon said simply. Whatever that costs me, I'll pay it. He pressed his hand briefly to his chest. Laura's heart beat on, warm and steady, entirely unimpressed by the dangerous room around them. He turned and walked toward the exit. Nobody stopped him. That, more than anything, told Song exactly how much had changed. The man's name was Cho Sung-min, small-time. Reliable enough for a single dirty job and forgettable enough to disappear after. He hadn't disappeared far. Mino tracked him to a basement apartment in Wajongba through a combination of old contacts and a phone number that Sung-min had been careless enough to reuse. 3 weeks of careful, patient work condensed into a single address on a folded piece of paper. Ji-hoon drove himself. No Mino. No backup. He found Sung-min exactly where Mino said he would be, small and unshaven, eating instant noodles in a dim kitchen that smelled of cigarettes and poor decisions. Sung-min saw Ji-hoon's face and knocked the noodles over, standing up. Ji-hoon sat down across from the empty chair and waited. Sung-min sat eventually. Because there was nowhere else to go. Tell me everything, Ji-hoon said. The call. The instructions. Who confirmed the target? Sung-min talked for 20 minutes. His voice shook throughout. The details matched everything Mino had already pieced together, but hearing it spoken aloud, the specific street, the specific time, the deliberate choice of vehicle, made Laura's death real in a new and terrible way. Ji-hoon listened without moving. When Sung-min finished, the kitchen was very quiet. I didn't know it was a woman, Sung-min said weakly. I didn't know anyone would. I know, Ji-hoon said. He stood and left Sung-min sitting in his dim kitchen, shaking over spilled noodles. The blade stayed where it was. He went back. 3 days later, before dawn, Ji-hoon returned to Wajongbu alone. He sat outside Sung-min's building in the dark car and did not move for a long time. Inside his jacket was nothing. He had left everything at the apartment deliberately. Because he didn't trust the version of himself that might walk through that door carrying something. Sung-min opened at the first knock, which meant he hadn't slept either. He saw Ji-hoon's empty hands and his face did something complicated. Ji-hoon stepped inside. Stood in the dim kitchen. Looked at this small, frightened man who had made one terrible choice for money and had been running from it ever since. The rage was there. He wasn't going to pretend otherwise. It sat in his chest like something with weight and heat and very specific intentions. And then Laura's heartbeat moved through him. Steady. Unhurried. Don't spend it being hard when you could be honest. Ji-hoon exhaled slowly. You're going to the police, he said. You're going to give them everything. Song's name. The instructions. All of it. Recorded and signed. Sung-min stared. And if I do? Then you walk away. Ji-hoon turned toward the door. Mercy is heavier than a blade. Carry it carefully. The call came from Dr. Shin at 11 p.m. Her voice was tight and controlled in the way that people trained for emergencies go tight and controlled when the emergency is personal. They're here. 6 of them. They have the street blocked. Ji-hoon was already moving before she finished. He arrived in 12 minutes. Song's men had positioned themselves efficiently, 2 at the clinic entrance, 2 covering the side alley, 2 more keeping the neighboring shopkeepers pressed back against their own doorways. One of them had already put something through the clinic's front window. Glass covered the pavement like scattered ice. Inside, Dr. Shin had gathered the 3 night staff into the back room. Ji-hoon walked into the middle of the street and stopped. The 6 men looked at him. He looked back. Song sent you to deliver a message, he said calmly. I understand. But look at what you're standing in front of. He gestured at the clinic. A free medical clinic in a poor district. Children come here. Elderly people who have nowhere else to go. Nobody moved. Go back to Song, Ji-hoon said. Tell him I received the message. Tell him I'm not leaving. One man stepped forward. Ji-hoon didn't step back. Laura's heartbeat was very steady inside his chest. Warm and certain and completely without fear. The man stopped. The man who stepped forward threw the first punch because he had been sent to do a job and standing still felt too much like failure. Ji-hoon took it across the jaw and didn't go down. What followed was not clean or cinematic. It was close and painful and decided more by endurance than technique. Two men came at once. Ji-hoon used the narrow street against them, keeping his back toward the clinic door, not advancing, not retreating. Just holding the space between Song's men and the people inside. He took damage. Ribs. A cut above his eye that bled freely and immediately. A knee that connected badly with his left side and reminded him sharply that he was 5 weeks post-open heart surgery. He stayed standing. Dr. Shin's voice came from behind the door. Ji-hoon. Ji-hoon, stop. You'll tear the surgery. Stay inside, he said. Steady despite everything. The 3 remaining men hesitated. Something about a bleeding, post-surgery man who simply would not move created a specific kind of uncertainty that even Song's instructions couldn't fully override. Sirens rose in the distance. Mino, who had been following Ji-hoon at a careful distance all evening, had made a single quiet phone call. The men left. Ji-hoon stood in the broken glass outside the clinic door until they were completely gone. Then he sat down slowly on the pavement. Laura's legal team had been building their case for 4 months. Quietly, carefully, in the way that Laura had always done things, without announcement, without waste. Ji-hoon gave them Sungmin's signed statement. Then he gave them 7 years of financial records that Mino had been collecting and storing in a place Song had never thought to look. Then he made 3 phone calls to journalists whose integrity he had tested personally over the years and found genuine. He didn't touch Song directly. Not once. He didn't need to. The first article appeared on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday there were 3 more. Prosecutors who had been watching the syndicate for years suddenly had the specific evidence they had been missing. Laura's negligence case, filed formally by her legal team, attached Song's name to the accident with enough documentation to make denial impossible. Song was arrested on a Friday. Quietly, outside his Gangnam building, in front of the doorman who had greeted him every morning for 11 years. Ji-hoon heard about it from Mino and said nothing for a long moment. Then, make sure the legal team has everything they need for the full trial. He walked to the clinic window and looked at the children's drawings still taped inside. Laura had trusted the law when he had always trusted the blade. She had been right. The tattoo removal clinic was small and professional, on a quiet street in Mapo, 3 blocks from Laura's clinic. Ji-hoon had walked past it 4 times before going in. The technician was a young woman who kept her expression carefully neutral when he removed his shirt and she saw the full extent of what covered his arms, hands, and neck. A decade of darkness mapped in black ink across living skin. All of it? She asked. All of it, he said. However long it takes. It was painful. He had expected that. What he hadn't expected was how much it would feel like something else entirely, not just removal but admission. Each session was a slow, deliberate acknowledgement that the man those tattoos had been built to represent was someone he was choosing, one appointment at a time, to leave behind. Dr. Shin came with him to the 3rd session without being asked. She sat in the waiting area and read a medical journal and didn't make it mean more than it was. But it meant something. After walking back toward the clinic together in the early evening, she said quietly, Laura used to say that the bravest thing a person could do is change. Ji-hoon looked at his hands. Fading now. Slowly becoming something that didn't tell the old story quite so loudly. She was usually right, he said. The building had taken 3 months to renovate. Ji-hoon had sold the majority of his remaining syndicate-connected assets to fund it. The process had been complicated and deliberate and occasionally painful in the way that meaningful things tend to be. But by the time the last contractor packed up and left, what had once been the syndicate's primary Mapo operations building was unrecognizable. Clean walls. Proper examination rooms. A waiting area with bright chairs and good lighting and a children's corner with books and paper and boxes of crayons. 3 times the size of Laura's original clinic. Fully staffed. Entirely free of charge for those who couldn't afford otherwise. Dr. Shin had agreed to lead it without hesitation. Ji-hoon suspected Laura had chosen her colleagues as carefully as she chose everything else. The naming ceremony was small. No speeches. No press beyond the single journalist Ji-hoon trusted. Just the staff, the neighboring shopkeepers, a handful of patients from the old clinic who had heard and come quietly. Above the entrance, in simple lettering in both Korean and English. The Laura Vance Center. Ji-hoon stood across the street and looked at it for a long time. An elderly woman from the neighborhood stopped beside him. The same one from months ago with her shopping bags. She looked at the sign and nodded slowly. "That's right," she said simply. "That's exactly right." Jeju in early morning was gray and wide and honest. Ji-hoon stood at the cliff edge with the wind moving through his jacket and the sea far below, green and restless and indifferent to everything happening above it. His hands were in his pockets. The tattoos were half gone now, the remaining ink faded to something softer, something that no longer announced itself quite so loudly. He had driven here alone. No Mino. No agenda. Just the island and the wind and the thing beating steadily inside his chest. He pressed his hand flat against his heart. He thought about her Sunday morning piano. Her handwriting on the letter. The way she had quietly, patiently kept herself healthy for years on the small chance that he might need her. The way she had loved him without ever making it his burden. The way she had saved him twice. Once with her presence. Once with her absence. The wind was cold. The sea moved far below without stopping. "I'm learning," he said quietly. To the wind. To the heartbeat. To her. "I'm still learning." Laura's heart beat steadily inside his chest. He had destroyed the man who killed her, without ever lifting a blade. But as the sun began to rise over Jeju, one question followed him into the light. If she had lived, would she have forgiven the man he used to be?